And then there's another thing that I didn't get a chance to talk about is I actually went on a date there. So how did this happen? What's the story behind this? It was quite surprising. So this was before my first ever relationship actually started. So while I was living at the hostel, there was a girl. She was quite pretty. And gosh, since this was like 5 or 6 years ago, I can't remember her name, and I'm afraid she isn't really important enough for me to recall her name. But anyway, she was obviously, from her accent, she was Canadian, but ethnically she was Pakistani. And we were bonding together over stuff like memes and internet culture. And there was a big TV in the common room, in the lounge room, where anyone who had the remote could watch anything that was available on the hostel's Netflix. And the film that we decided to watch was a James Franco film. Oh yes, The Disaster Artist with James Franco. And if any of you guys are familiar with Tommy Wiseau's The Room, well, I don't need to talk about that too much, but it's a really memorable film because of how bad the acting is. Anyway, The Disaster Artist is essentially, it's a film that dramatizes the making of and the story behind that legendary flopbuster. And it was very funny. And both of us were laughing like crazy. Anyway, at the time when we were together, because a lot of people come and go at the hostel, I never really gave much thought to her. I just thought she was just another cool person who was probably going to be out the next day. But at some point, she casually noticed while we were exchanging Facebook together. Oh yeah, this was back when I used Facebook. I don't really do that anymore. She noticed that I was single. And I thought nothing of it at the time because I think looking for relationships was the last thing on my mind. But she told me that she actually had a mutual friend. No, she didn't have a mutual friend. She had a friend who was also single, and she was trying to set me up on a blind date. And I thought, a blind date? I've never been on anything like that before. But then, but I was curious, and I thought I might give it a try. So I told her, yeah, sure, why not? The worst that could happen is that, I don't know, we both go out and have fun together and discover that it doesn't work out. But I figure there's no harm in giving it a try. I was still relatively quite adventurous back then. I was in my mid-20s, and I was quite naive. I'd never actually been on a proper serious date before. I think that, looking back, that must have been the first actual date that I went on. And it was my first proper taste of what modern dating is like and the problems that come with it. So the friend that she had set me up with, her name was Maria. She had quite an interesting story. I mean, basically, I think she was one part Indian, one part Russian, but based on her accent and everything and her mannerism, she was basically Canadian. And she was trilingual. Because most Canadians, especially those in Ontario and in Quebec, are bilingual in both English and French. That's another thing. If you've ever gone shopping there, you'll see everything from the milk cartons, the cigarette packets and everything. The packaging labels and the nutritional information is all written in both English and French. Because they speak both English and French over there. But anyway, she was a fluent speaker of English, French, and Russian. And to me, this made her look incredibly exotic and appealing. So before we met, we were just exchanging text messages with each other. I didn't really know how it was going to turn out. But before we got into the stage where we were discussing where we're going to meet, I remember asking her, "Can you describe what you look like to me?" And she was very, she appeared very charming. It was very hard for me in that moment to not like her already. And this was before we'd even met, because she was very disparaging about her looks and her appearance. And she was very self-conscious about how she described herself. I think I was pretty much the same. But anyway, fast forward to the day of our date, because we actually did set up a fun little date for the two of us. And what we decided to do was we were going to catch a ferry over to one of the islands. So in Lake Ontario, which I think Lake Ontario is the big body of water that separates Toronto from New York, the state, in the United States. I can't remember if it's connected with the Hudson River in any way, but it is a very large lake, and there are islands there. And the islands, well, they're a perfect place to go out and do a lot of sightseeing if you've got time to kill and some company to kick around with. So I figured, why don't we go there? And so we did. And when I first met her, honestly, I thought she was very pretty. I was relieved, at the very least. I was just relieved that I hadn't been set up on a blind date with somebody who I would have visually been horrified at the mere sight of had we been set up on a normal date. Because that was probably my biggest reservation about the idea of being set up on a blind date. But anyway, I went with my gut and went for it. And gosh, she was a very pretty young thing. And what did we actually do on the island? Well, we had a lot of fun. Well, looking back, I certainly had a lot of fun. And at the time, I was so sure that she also had great fun with me. We were both spending a lot of the time talking about funny, silly, embarrassing stories from our childhood. And we were also exchanging jokes. I've learned since then that I just can't tell jokes. Every time I tell a joke, it just doesn't work. I'm just not funny. I was born with a life-threatening condition of not being funny. I'm so convinced that I could tell a joke that would not get a reaction out of anyone, but if somebody who was a lot more funny, somebody who had a better understanding of comedy than I was, someone like that, they could read out the same joke that I did and get a rapturous, belting applause and laughter from everyone in the room. But I can't do that. I don't know what it is about me, but I seem to just have this curse where I can't tell a joke properly. Or I'm just not that, I'm not funny, I'm not good at reading facial cues. I don't know what it is. That being said, though, I think I did get a chuckle out of her from now and then. I think some of the worst jokes that I remember telling her was, oh yes, so the jokes that I said to her were, first of all, why did the elephant paint its toenails pink? And she'd ask, why? I said, to hide upside down in a bowl of cherries. And then she would just look and think, what? And I say, you seem surprised, but have you ever seen an elephant hiding upside down in a bowl of cherries? And she'd say, no. I'd say, you see, they're that good. And she found that one funny. She told some jokes as well. It's sad now that I look back on this, but it seemed like everything was going perfectly well. I think there's so many people in the modern dating scene who have stories just like this. You know, everything seemed to be going perfectly fine. We walked on the boardwalk. We got plenty of good views of the harbour front and the lake. The weather was perfect. Actually, no. The weather was quite crap. I don't remember if it rained or not, but maybe it did. I don't know. But that's the thing. I think I remember we were joking about how bad the weather was. We had some food together, and on the ferry journey back, I remember I had my arm around her shoulder, and you know, if she wasn't happy, I remember thinking, if she wasn't happy, if she felt like I was exceeding boundaries, she would have she'd have brushed me off and brushed me aside. And I remember I was being especially mindful for those telltale signs that she wasn't interested or that the date wasn't going well. But no matter how many times I double scanned, triple scanned, and I could not find those signs anywhere. So as far as I was concerned, I thought we had a perfect date. And I gave her a peck on the cheek, went back to my place. We both had each other's numbers, and the next day I texted her to see if she'd be up for seeing me again. I didn't get a response, so I gave it another couple of days, and I sent her another text. Still no response. Fast forward to a week, no response even then. And then 10 days had passed. I was beginning to get annoyed, because if she hadn't seen any of my text messages, or she was too busy to respond, I could give her the benefit of the doubt if 1 or 2 days had gone by without any response. But this had gone on for over a week and a half. And if she wasn't interested in me from the beginning, that wouldn't have been so bad, but I needed to hear back from her. I needed to hear her definitively say, sorry, I don't think this is working out. Or, I'm sorry, I had a good time, but I don't think you're the right person for me. But I never got anything like that either. So I was beginning to wonder if maybe there's two distinct possibilities. Either she thought so little of me that I wasn't worth her time, and I wasn't even worth so much of a text to say, a rejection text, or something had happened to her and maybe she'd been kidnapped, or maybe she'd lost her phone. I actually got to messaging her mutual friend who'd set me up with her on the blind date, and asked her, and even she didn't seem to know what was going on. Perhaps she was being loyal to her and trying to cover for her, now that I look back. I did eventually get a text back from her. I think, was it 13 or 14 days later? But it was very vague and didn't really give much away. She just said, hi, sorry, I've been busy with things. She was a student at UOT, I think. I forget what it was that she was studying. She was quite intelligent. But that was the last time I ever actually heard from her. And when I instantly responded with a text of my own, letting her know that I'd seen what she sent, I didn't get another one after that. And by this point, I was almost certain that she was doing this on purpose. Now, I forget how long of this radio silence I endured before I'd finally had enough and sent a bitter, I think sarcastic. It was kind of emotionally immature now that I look back, but I was really angry that anyone could behave like this. And I basically said, look, I can't believe you would treat me like this. If you weren't interested in me, why couldn't you have the decency to say this to me up front? I'd respect that a whole lot more, and I'd stop and I'd leave you alone. Why would you do this? And then that was it. I'd blocked her number because at that point I wanted her out of sight and out of mind. And that was the last time that was the last I ever heard of her. I've since learned that there is a word for this kind of behavior. It's called ghosting. And the fact that there exists a word for this phenomenon means that I'm certainly not the only person who's experienced it. There's actually a lot of people, a lot of them who I suspect are men, who've had this done to them. And I'm almost totally certain at this point that only women do this. Because, you see, how do you tell somebody that you're not interested in them? Well, you have to be, if not blunt, you have to be kind of direct, and you have to run the risk of people reacting in a negative way. And I believe, given the differences in male and female psychology, men are more likely to do the graceful thing and reject you. Some can be quite, cold and blunt at it. But as men, I think we understand that the truth is important, and there's no sense in lying to hurt, to avoid hurting another person's feelings. I think this is true of most men. I don't think it's true of all men, but I think it is, on average, it's what makes us different to women. Whereas with women, on the other hand, women are more conflict averse, and if they're not interested in a man's advances, she'll probably employ more covert means to get him off her scent. Things like making excuses or saying, "Oh, sorry, I'm busy that day," and then not suggesting a follow-up date where they could meet up, or pretending to be ill on a certain day, or giving the wrong number, things like that. But honestly, I don't understand. Whether you are male or female, I don't understand how anyone could act like that to somebody. You gotta understand that 2 weeks before this had happened, I felt like we were both arrested in the moment. I thought we were having such a great time. I was looking everywhere for the red flags, and I didn't see a single one. Maybe this is only a testament to how bad I am at noticing and observing things. But I was working twice as hard as normal because this was the first date I'd ever gone on. I'd heard all kinds of bad stories about things that happened to people on dates, things that are going badly and stuff like that. And I was working overtime to make sure everything was going smoothly. I was kind, I was chivalrous, I gave it a go at being funny, and I think I did get a laugh out of her here or there. But the entire time she smiled at me, she smiled to my face. How can you do that to somebody and then cut off all contact with them weeks later? That's a level of cruelty that I don't think I'm capable of understanding, and I don't give a damn what anyone's explanation for it is. You just don't do that to a person, period. Like, if somebody's annoying you, you tell them that, or better yet, or a better thing to do if you're a bit more conflict averse, is you tell a friend, and then that friend tells them, because that would have been better than what she did. You know, I was relatively clueless back in my mid-20s about the state of modern dating and why so many people were just burnt out and fed up with it. But I'm fairly certain that this is just one of many reasons. You see, there's all kinds of things. I probably have to make a separate video about the problems with modern dating, but there's a massive power imbalance that exists in between men and women. Basically, there's a phenomenon called the Pareto principle, where 20% of women will basically have 80%. No, sorry, it's not that. It's 80% of women will be attracted to the top 20% of men. And when I say top 20%, I mean this in terms of looks, in terms of wealth, social status. And they will be too self-conscious to admit this most of the time. They will talk about how they're looking for a man who's funny, who's caring, who's smart and chivalrous, things like that. But when you examine them by their actions, you'll see that the modern dating market, this is especially true, by the way, of online dating. You'll see that it's a rigged game. And if you're an average man, the odds are massively, impossibly stacked against you. See, the average woman, and this is true, by the way, of average women. You know, how would I describe the girl I dated, Maria? Well, I thought she was good looking. I wouldn't describe her as stunning, but honestly, would I have married her? Yeah, of course I would. I didn't think as little about her appearance as she did, apparently. But the reality of the situation is the average woman, someone like her, she will have 5 or 6, probably even more than that, probably like a dozen of men on her in her contact list, and all of them are vying for her attention at the same time, and she can pick from any one of them that she chooses. What that basically means is, if you're in a situation where you have this much bargaining power, then what are the other 11 to you? Well, basically chump change. They're just simply not worth your time. And thinking about it that way, if you're in a position where you have this many male suitors vying for your attention, you would probably think you're too important to be concerned about the feelings or, you know, how you treat the other 11 because of the dynamics that exist. And, you know, it's impossible. It's especially impossible for me, but you cannot, at least you can't 100% of the time, you cannot be in any position to know what another person is truly thinking. We haven't yet concocted the technology that would help us be able to read people's minds. And there's a whole ethical debate on whether that would even be a good thing to do anyway. But the best way to understand people is, well, if not by talking, but by reading body language, by understanding human nature, and by trying to understand what people's motivations are. Not everyone's equally capable of doing that. In hindsight, would I have even been able to think someone like her capable of that? Well, not without knowing what I now know currently. See, back then, I was naive, I was starstruck, and I was a lot less embittered and misogynistic than I am currently. I wouldn't be the person I am now if it weren't for my failed romantic adventures and experiences that I've had in the past. Part of me is still bitter and angry about the experience I had back then, because I really felt like we had something. I had such a good time there, and I would have loved to have taken her on another date, but it didn't work out. It just was not to be. And if she had told me, look, I'm sorry, but you're just not what I'm looking for. You're not, I'm looking for somebody who can support me financially. I'm looking for somebody who's, 7 feet tall, somebody with a smaller, thinner nose or whatever it is that she's looking for, or somebody who's also trilingual. Yeah, no thanks. It would have upset me, but at least I wouldn't have been kept in suspense for so long. At least I wouldn't have been left alone with my own doubts and my own wandering imagination, where I would have had to have theorized what could have happened. But anyway, that about covers it for all of my adventures and misadventures living in Toronto for a few months. In the next part of the video, I'm going to be covering the next leg of my stint in Canada, where I got offered a job elsewhere in Collingwood, which was also in South Ontario, but 100 miles further up north from Toronto. So stick around in the next part. This has been quite a long video, but I don't really prepare these stories, and a lot of them I'm trying to recall via memory, and I'm doing the best I can. Anyway, I think I've gotten off my chest pretty much everything I needed to say about the summer months of 2019. So, I'll be seeing you guys in the next part of the video. This has been Tracking. Hope you guys have a lovely day. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.